Well, good late morning to those of you on the East Coast. It's still relatively early morning here on the West Coast, the United States. I wasn't expecting to have to do one of these so to speak emergency podcasts right now, but let me go ahead and switch to the. This is not the first place we heard about this, but I mean, I think in the last maybe hour, I started hearing, not just me, but hearing from other media folks that there are rumors started circulating about a rollback, and I'm sure that it just depends on which circles you're in, but there's not a lot of information yet, and certainly there's going to be there's a lot of questions still to answer. But what it sounds like is they did not find this issue with the SLS in space second stage, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, during the wet dress rehearsal. But NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman was the first one out with this. He posted on social media that they saw interrupted helium flow through the some part of the stage. The stage uses, I believe, the stage uses helium for both purge and pressurization for the RL-10 engines, and of course its own main propulsion system. So I can, and then so that's an issue, and it sounds like it sounds like, obviously, as you see here, they're planning to roll the vehicle back to the vehicle assembly building, and the reason that is because they don't have access inside the launch vehicle stage adapter to those to either the helium bottles themselves, or maybe more likely somewhere in the plumbing, so to speak, between the helium bottles. And let me go ahead and let's I'll try and set the scene a little bit here first, and then we can dig into details and do questions. And I mean, I got my questions too. I guess really the big bottom line, I haven't had a chance to go flush and refresh my travel plans, but if they roll back, and maybe even if they don't, just dealing with this is probably going to push them out of the March window. If they roll back, then there's just no chance that they're going to fly in early March. I think the question that people are asking now, maybe kind of indirectly by asking, well, how much work is it going to take to fix this, is whether the April window which would be launch period 18, would be possible. And that's, let's see, it's here, you have to kind of look at how much time it takes to roll back, do repairs, and then roll back out, and what that means. And so we can kind of go through that. Those details are important, but I think I want to try not to get too far away from, because this is breaking news, that they're looking at, they have a problem with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage with the helium system, which is a part of their main propulsion system. Again, I believe it is used for both purging the RL-10 engines and also the lines, and then also is used for pressurization of the tanks, the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks. And so things changed pretty quickly. So that was one of the first questions, because we just heard they were looking at data overnight, and then Jared Isaacman was able to clarify, because again, the second wet dress rehearsal was just completed Thursday night, and it's only Saturday morning here. So the obvious question for a lot of us was, were you looking at wet dress rehearsal 2 data overnight, or were we looking at live data overnight? And Jared Isaacman was nice enough to respond to a question on social media and say, no, this was live data. They were looking at the helium. They were looking at pressures probably in the helium system, and saw something go change abruptly. So the so you'll we have time. I mean, I don't have a lot here. I'm waiting for more information. We're probably going to see updates hopefully today, or at least to give us an idea about maybe at least a little bit of an idea, because there's if we go to a live shot or NASA's the live shot, you can barely see, but they installed the first contingency pad access platform. You can see that kind of reddish color there. They just installed it overnight last night. So, and I mean, they were working that yesterday evening too. So there was a picture of somebody. So, and this is the crane. So, a few of the things that will need to happen is they'll need to obviously remove that platform. They'll need to bring the engine and booster service platforms back into the flame hull, and those will ride with the mobile launcher back to the vehicle assembly building. You can kind of see these triangles. Those are the side flame deflectors. Those will need to be rolled back out from underneath the mobile launcher. Those are side flame. It's a combination of side flame deflectors and extensible columns that provide additional structural support for the mobile launcher base. And then at the same time and in parallel, I'm sure we won't be able to see it from here. The scrub line, the scrub line down here blocks the view of the pad gate, but they will probably be. If they aren't doing it, they're getting ready to do it, which is to bring the crawler transporter back to the pad gate and get it ready it'll eventually then go up to the pad surface to pick the vehicle and the mobile launcher up and take it back to the vehicle assembly building. So, let me just quickly, just in terms of what are we talking about, ICPS helium. This has been running in the background, but let's see here. So let me stop this. This is video of the Artemis II stage when it was lifted and mated to the launch vehicle stage adapter. I'm looking for a bit of a close up here. But you can see those black helium bottles, and in renders they are usually rendered in red, because you leave protective covers over these. Those are composite overwrapped pressure vessels. So they're high pressure bottles. You usually leave padding on them so that you don't damage them, accidentally bump into them and damage them, and that's what those red pads are for. And typically those red pads are on all the time until it's stacked. Let me see if I can find it. No, that's a little bit better. You can kind of see in here. You can see some tubing and some, there's probably a still. I want to see if they zoom in more, but those are the helium bottles themselves. And then, okay, this is a little bit better. It's hard to tell. But anyway, just to give you an idea about what they're talking about, because it could be anywhere in the system. They may have, again, I'm sure that they have multiple valves in the system. So those of you joining us, I'll try and remember to do this more repeatedly. But those of you joining us, I spooled up this live stream because NASA announced in the last maybe hour or so that they have issues with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage with the helium system, which is again a purge and pressurization system, and there may be other applications for it. But as you can see down here in the blog post, let me scroll it a little bit. And we may, again, since this is sort of breaking news, I would anticipate that we're going to get some additional information, hopefully by the end of the day. But it's going to be, it's not going to, they had the issue with the ICPS helium. It's likely they're going to have to roll the vehicle back to the vehicle assembly building to get access to wherever the issue is, and if they've isolated it, make repairs, and then they're going to have to come back out to the pad and just if they were to just disconnect everything from the vehicle, pick it up, move it 1 inch backwards, and then put it back on the pad, that would cost you a good part of 2 weeks of work, because you have to disconnect all of the things that happened. And so there's some other things here, like they want to deservice the solid rocket booster hydrazine tanks. If this is going to be a short, we're hearing a little bit of rumors that this isn't, which is kind of ironic, that this isn't, that it won't take long to fix this when they get access to it, but it's going to take a lot of work to get access to it. But if they have to, even just leaving the pad any distance and then coming back, means that you have to do approximately, you have to go through the entire pad flow again, which means pad validations, hooking the commodities back up, electrical, pneumatic, all of the fluids, propellants, electricity. You have to you have to rehook up the emergency egress system baskets and wires. You have to there, all of those things. And then you may have there again, maybe they don't have to redo the solid rocket booster HPU hydrazine tank servicing, but that's probably only going to save you a couple of days, maybe 3 days. So it's repeating the pad flow by itself is going to cost you a couple of weeks. And so, like I said, if they just were to back this thing off the pedestals and then put it back down, it's going to take a little bit of time just to disconnect everything. And so I wouldn't necessarily expect them to be able to roll back. It might take them a couple of days to be in a position to roll back, but they will obviously be mobilizing, unless we come back and they've come up with some solution that they don't need to do this and they don't need to roll back. But at least right now, that's, we're not hearing anything like that. We're hearing likely rollback, and including in this blog. So, but yeah, what the reason it takes so long is because it just takes there's a lot of preparation and cleanup time for any activity. So, and one of the, again, and so it's occurring to me now. So they had this contingency pad access platform that they were just beginning to set up. And but pardon me, I don't need to wind up on that B so hard, but they will have access to those systems in the vehicle assembly building. And so one of those options that they may choose to do is they may just choose to go ahead and do the flight termination system reset in the VAB. They're going to be right there. They're going to have to extend the platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So they could extend the platform F halves and just go ahead and do that there to get it out of the way. I mean, when you do it in the VAB, which is typical, you have to be careful about when you do it. And so I'm sure they're looking at all of those things. I wonder if there's still some desire, which they'll have to trade against time constraints, to use the contingency pad access system. It's possible that if they want to do that, it will give them the benefit of doing this, even if it's the first time they're only doing it. It could give them several days of schedule back. So we will see what they decide to do. So. And so I apologize. I'm sort of trying to throw things out here. Again, I will try and repeat myself because this is breaking news, which is that they found an issue with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which is the SLS in space second stage. They saw something in the helium system overnight, and it's something that they've probably it sounds like they've found out about it last night, and then it's like, is there any way we can fix this at the pad? And it sounds like no. Again, maybe somebody will come up with an idea. I doubt it. Again, they've probably already gone through the stages of grief, so to speak, about that. And so now the question is, how long does it take for them to roll back? How long does it take for them to fix it? What else can, and I obviously the big umbrella question is, when could they be ready to launch now? And I don't know that they can necessarily answer that, but yeah, I haven't had a chance to look. I should probably bring up, again, this is one of those unfortunate things about the disclosure and the ability to provide information. I mean, it on the one hand, again, I'm not talking about sort of the weight of this or that. It is good that Mr. Isaacman is willing to spend time. I mean, it is the weekend, but I'm sure he works every day anyway as NASA administrator. But I appreciate, just like a lot of people appreciate, his willingness to be forthcoming. But okay, and he just posted something 5 minutes ago. Maybe I should bring this up over here if I can. Yeah, so those are the obvious things. So he's talking about the helium bottles, the helium system. It's part of the main propulsion system. You have, it's a pneumatic system. Rocket stages typically will have purge and pressurization. The core stage has it, liquid rocket stages anyway. So here's what he posted about 5 minutes ago, and I'm just reading this. But he's talking about the ICPS, which is the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. I'm gonna kind of assume y'all are familiar with what the ICPS is. Helium bottles are used to purge the engines as well as for tank pressurization. The systems worked correctly in both wet dress rehearsals. Last evening, the team was unable to get helium flow through the vehicle. This occurred during a routine operation to repressurize the system. He says, we observed a similar failure signature on Artemis I. But I'm not, again, that I think that will, we'll need a little bit more background on what he's referring to there, and where. I think what he's talking about there is the reason that he's putting that out, where he says we observed a similar failure signature on Artemis I, is that likely means that they understand what the problem is and how to fix it, and obviously the implications of what's quote unquote broken. So it sounds like they have a pretty good idea about what busted, what broke. And obviously, if they know what it is and where it is, then that gives them at least a decent idea about what it's going to take to fix it. And then that tells you, I mean, I think, again, I may be wrong, so I may be being too, unequivocal, but, there's really nothing that you can do servicing-wise with ICPS on the pad. I mean, we've been talking about this contingency pad access system. There's very little servicing you can do to the SLS vehicle and even Orion when it's on the pad. Really, the only as designed access is down on the ML deck. So you do have down here, you do have access to the RS-25 engines. You do have access to the engine section. You have access to the tail service mast umbilicals. But the vehicle was not designed to be serviced at the pad. And of course, given all the things that happened with Artemis I and all of the repairs that they needed to do, I mean, not a lot, but there were multiple situations. They had an issue with ICPS during the first Artemis I pad stay. It was not, I don't know if he's referring to this, but they had in that case, they had a gasket that got pushed into the system, and part of it had lodged on a valve. So I don't know if I don't think that this is the same signature that they're talking about, because the gasket that blew out was not part of the system. Again, we'll see. We'll obviously need more details to understand exactly what that means, but and so another thing he says here is the vehicle's in a safe configuration. They're using the ground environmental control system purge for the engines versus the onboard helium supply. So they do have an alternate way to keep the engines in a good, keep purges on them. You want to keep the engines dry and obviously clear of any debris. And so that's what that purge is for. So it's, both the environmental, you don't want moisture. You typically don't want moisture in engines. Okay, and then he says potential faults could include the final filter between the ground and flight vehicle located on the umbilical, though this seems least likely based on the failure signature. So this is why they're interested in what the failure signature is. It could also be a failed QD umbilical interface. It could also be a failed check valve. That I think that's the check valve didn't fail on the Artemis I ICPS. It was quote unquote clogged with FOD, with foreign object debris. But then the bottom line is, regardless of the fault, access, fixing it is going to require going back to the VAB. SLS does not have, I don't like using the word chronic, doesn't sound like exactly the right word, but we see these repeated issues of, and I've talked about this in live streams before about for all the money that they spent, the infrastructure for SLS is poor. And so if you recall, those of you recall, the Saturn V had a mobile service structure. I don't know, as this is supposed to be a clean pad concept. This vehicle's only supposed to be designed to be out at the pad for only a week and to operate similarly to like Atlas and Vulcan and that are some more modern than the Apollo and Shuttle, but they don't have any ability to do any repairs. And the difference between Vulcan and SLS is this is the vertical integration facility at Pad 41, the VIF, is much closer to the pad, and so just the getting the vehicle back and forth takes less time, and it's a less complicated Vulcan, and even Atlas before it are not as complicated as SLS, and so it just so when you roll an Atlas or a Vulcan out to Pad 41, there's maybe a handful of days. Usually they roll it out about 48 hours before their planned launch time. So they don't have a very small number of things that they need to do to the vehicle when it reaches the pad. For this vehicle, they have, a week and a half to 2 weeks. So it just takes a long time to turn around. And so again, you end up in this question of, well, why don't they have something like the Apollo mobile service structure so that they would have the ability to perform repairs on the vehicle at the pad? I wonder if I'm sure I have a picture. It's just, can I bring it up? Because this is a question that comes up from time to time. Yeah. Let's see if I can. I don't know if this is going to come up easily. Okay, it did, just for once. Hey, what do you know? So, doesn't matter whether this is 39A or 39B. It's the same kind of thing. So, and you can see it required the crawler transporter, but again, they don't have. SLS has such minimal infrastructure. So one of the reasons that you can't, yes, production is an issue in terms of flying the vehicle more frequently than even once a year, but they just don't have the infrastructure to fly, to stack and fly multiple vehicles. So the pad wouldn't necessarily be the pinch point. It's, other things like they only have one place they can stack SLS vehicles. They don't have infrastructure like this. They have no ability to, well, not no inability, but they have a very limited ability to service the vehicle at the pad. And so they're, if you want to do, again, if you want to be an accountant, I wonder how much this costs, how much it's going to cost to do this. It's probably not enough to affording something like this, something like the mobile service structure. So it isn't just the cost of building it; it's the cost of maintaining it. And again, that's part of the infrastructure bill that you have to pay every year, every month, all the time. So it's not as simple question, but again, I think that the criticism is that this just wasn't even an option because they aren't willing to spend money on infrastructure, and so. It is what it is. I would say again, there probably are other reasons why they don't have something like this, but I'm not sure. Like you get into this chicken and egg situation. The time to set out your infrastructure and size it for what type of operations you're going to do is at the beginning of the program. And if you'll recall with the flat budget for SLS and Orion, they planned as a baseline to fly this vehicle only twice in 4 years. So, I mean, that's, and then I guess, get up to a annual flight with all of the other stuff that they need to do. But it fits into it fits as a part, one of those fingers off of the criticism of people talking about, again, it's a pejorative to call it a jobs program, but unfortunately this, you can tag something like this onto that because, again, it just demonstrates it shows a level of commitment. Infrastructure to me shows a level of commitment to a program. Well, let me be more specific. It shows a level of commitment to operations and doing things. So again, that's the daylight between having a program and using a program. And I have made this criticism before of, you have a program and you use a program. You how much are this is you want to maintain this. You want to have it, but do you want to use it, and how much do you want to use it? So anyway, so this is not. It's disappointing, but this has always been something that I think has been a nagging issue. This is just another facet to that. And again, to be fair, how do you break even for a structure like this when it has pretty high maintenance costs? Because again, this is out in the salt air in Florida. You have hurricanes. You have severe weather. You have to protect it for that. How many times are you going to have to use it? Now, again, because of the low flight rate, we've now, I think, seen a couple. We've seen at least one occasion for both of these vehicles where we're having some capability of more of a capability to service the vehicle at the pad would have saved at least some of this servicing time and going back and forth. So it's not, there is no the answer to this question. It's just, I think my problem with it is they just weren't even willing to entertain the idea of spending the money for something like this, or just, or more generically, they have no infrastructure to support servicing this vehicle, any infrastructure to note or of note, because again, even this contingency pad access system is very, it's the kind, it shows you how much money they have for something like this. So yeah, anyway. So, and again, to repeat for those of you who might be joining, I think now we're maybe 90 minutes from when I first heard about this, but not so long ago. Yeah, this is about 90 minutes ago from when this was first reported. So, but what they're saying is overnight and not connected to the wet dress rehearsal that was performed on Thursday night, they saw an issue with the helium systems, which are part of the main propulsion system for the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which is the Artemis II in space, which is the SLS in space second stage. And they don't have, it doesn't appear they have any ability to fix it at the pad, which means they have to roll back, which means March is off the table. They are not going to be able to fix this and get back out all of the things this entails, because really that's the point probably to make here, which is even if fixing this in the VAB only takes a day, you've just disconnecting this vehicle from the pad. And, you know, as I was saying earlier, if you just disconnected the vehicle and had the crawler lifted off the pedestals and then set it back down, you just bought 2 weeks of work doing that. Going back to the VAB, it probably buys you at least a couple more days, probably more than 2 days, because you got to roll it. You know, it's all day rolling it back, all day rolling it back out to the pad. And then there's all of the preparations and cleanup work that you need to do when you're in the VAB is going to add additional time. So that's why March is off the table, even though we're still 2 weeks away from the first opportunity in March. And so again, big picture. Let me bring up the. This is not the most recent version of the, and so now again, if you watch the post-test news conference, us evil media types are always whining, and so, but again, we were asking for a more extended launch availability calendar, because just in case something like this happened, and it did, and so. You know, it's unfortunate, it's disappointing, but, you know, plan for the best, prepare for the worst, or is it the other way around? But I mean, you know, we're trying to be as prepared as we can be. And it's hard to tell. You're certainly going to wonder about, so I'm looking for the availability calendar. Okay, I don't have it. I have an image of it. That's fine. I'll use that. Once I get it. But we can take a look at eventually once I get there. Okay, so, I mean, really the launch windows at this point, to some extent, it's too early to worry about times. We're really at this point, I think, kind of, it's more about dates and what's possible. So the next, just to level set. So February, this was part of launch period 17. The March window that we've been looking at, more obviously since 17 went out the window, was launch period 18. So now if March is out the window, April actually has parts of 2. This would be launch period 19. And then again, this is why us evil media types were whining the other day about not having enough information. April 30th is actually a part of launch period 20. And so, you know, again, in the name of being better prepared and better aware of what's next. So if they're rolling back, launch period 19 becomes the next possible window. And at this point, we do not have information about launch period 20. Launch period 19 becomes the earliest possible window. And so then you start to wonder, what about the next window? And of course, again, thinking ahead and just trying to think ahead and be prepared for possibilities. That's why I think people are asking about this. So, so, so these would be the dates. I think April 1st is since March 3rd came off the table already, but April 1st actually would be a daylight window. But I think again we're a little ways away from it. We don't know how long it's going to take, and whether launch period 19 and April 1st is available. So so I should stop at this point. And let me go back and look for some questions. But you can, so that's a good, I mean, it's a good big picture question. What's the rush? I guess you could look at it a couple of different ways, but an obvious way is that pretty much for this entire century, but if not, since for the last 20 years, the U.S. has the goal for the U.S. government has been to return to the moon. So you could call it a rush from day to day, but you could also say that they've had this goal for 20 years to return to the moon, and they have not accomplished that. We could, if you want to get down into the weeds, which people have, you can question again, as I'm doing, what's the level of commitment, and like how much do they really want to? I think it's fair to ask that question even today. How much do they really want to be? So today, it has been reframed as beating the Chinese, who have their own lunar landing program, and that looks like it's reaching the level of maturity to fly crews to the moon, maybe by the end of the decade, and land on the moon by the end of the decade. So what was 20 years ago, the U.S. returning to the moon, by maybe 2020 or the middle of 2015 at one point perhaps, or maybe even the early 2010s, but is now, as of today, landing by the end of 2028, landing by the end of this presidential term, and then if not, an acceptable consolation prize is beating the Chinese to get to land the next person on the moon. And so that's there's always some level of urgency, even if it doesn't match the level of commitment. But that's essentially why there's rush. And you can also say, again, in terms of this long-standing goal, going slow, this is Artemis II is the crude demo for this system. It's been delayed several years, again, just like the goal for the next lunar landing for the United States. And so there's a desire to fly when you're ready. And I think, again, up until last night when they saw this reading on the ICPS, I think a consensus was that it looked like they'd finally cleared the last big hurdle, which was this wet dress rehearsal, which was about the hydrogen leak that they saw in the first one. So, but I mean, those are some of the aspects to why they're rushing, so to speak, or why rushing's not fair. It's just there is a sense of urgency to this because it's behind schedule, because Congress and the White House have now, I don't know if you want to call it all in, but they sound like they're all in, at least rhetorically, in terms of this second lunar landing race with China. So, when your bosses, if your bosses say you're all in, you're all in. It doesn't, again, we can, I'm out here in the peanut gallery, so I'm gonna ask questions and test, be looking for commitment tests. How much money are you spending? How much money are you spending from year to year? How consistent, how consistent is that? How much does it fluctuate from year to year, month to month, administration to administration? But again, their bosses are in a hurry, at least rhetorically, and so they're in a hurry. So. That's a good. So again, I'm going back a few minutes here. It's not actually not that long ago. So question is fuel test again when it gets back to the pad. I think that's a good question, especially since we've heard them talk about the possibility that the loads, the forces on the hydrogen, the liquid hydrogen tail service mast umbilical plates could be a contributing factor to why they sometimes leak. And so that could be in the cards. I think maybe what they may be willing to do based on what they they tried to do a test last week, and then they just did a full wet dress rehearsal this week. Maybe they just do a partial tanking test on the vehicle when it gets back out to the pad. Again, there's, this is just one of those things about the pace of this work. So, the ICPS is a superset of the Delta Cryogenic second stage capabilities. And it's certainly one of the things I'm wondering is, so something broke in the helium system, but I mean, this stage has been, this unit was delivered to Cape Canaveral in, I believe, 2021. So that's 5 years ago. So it's been sitting in storage for the better part of 4 years. And then it was stacked on the vehicle not quite a year ago. But I mean, it's been sitting in storage for 4 years. Parts have, you have mean time between failure of parts, moving parts and parts in general, but then that's a time requirement to replace something after X amount of time has passed, and there's a cycle requirement. But it does, one of those questions in terms of servicing and maintenance for these systems, which this stage has flown much more than SLS has flown so far. The design and the implementation, especially of the helium system and the main propulsion system for the ICPS and the RL-10 engine itself. You wonder if they'd been ready to fly this vehicle after only 2 years of storage, for instance, instead of 4 or 5 years of storage, if this part breaks, did this part just break because it's been sitting in storage for, not just because, but again, is a contributing issue here, the fact that it's just been sitting around in storage for a long time, and unfortunately there isn't anything they can do about that, but it is, again, well, I take that back too. But it's like any other thing that you do maintenance on. It costs money to do. It costs more money if your periodic maintenance and servicing is every week versus every month, or versus every quarter versus every year. So if you're checking every week, that's expensive, or more expensive than checking twice a year or every quarter. So these are all fun decisions, but there are things that have to be taken into consideration. Having said that, you wonder if they might. I would imagine they're probably going to go take a look at the Artemis III stage, assuming that they can. I assume that they can. I don't know where we lost track of exactly where that stage was or is. I believe it's in the Delta Operations Center, and not in the HIF at Pad 37. And that was, the pad was supposedly turned over to space. Well, it was turned over to SpaceX, but I don't know about the HIF. So, but anyway, lots of fingers, lots of details. Again, lots of things to juggle in terms of details, but that's what I'm here for. So, it's a little bit of a sidebar, but I should be able to relatively quickly. So Aaron's asking what's in storage now and ready for stacking that's for Artemis 3. Again, so let's pretend that there isn't something they need to go check on the Artemis 3 ICPS 2, but the ICPS is obviously ready. The solid rocket boosters are ready, and so ICPS is ready in storage for Artemis 3. Solid rocket boosters are ready in storage for Artemis 3. RS-25 engines are ready in storage for Artemis 3. Those are again the connectors. So the launch vehicle stage adapter, so the connector between the core stage and the ICPS, that's done and ready in storage. The Orion stage adapter, which is the connector between ICPS and Orion, that's not done, but it's one of the simplest pieces of the overall vehicle, and so it's that one you can assert is more of a just in time. We'll finish the remaining preparations when they need to stack it, which is probably at least 2 years into the future. But so the remaining pieces are Orion, so the crew module and the service module for Artemis 3, and the SLS core stage. Both of those are still in assembly and test. So they're partially assembled, partially not assembled, and they have to finish final assembly, and then they have to finish final integrated test and checkout, and then they'd be turned over to Exploration Ground Systems for stacking at that, or at least be ready to do that at that point. So. But again, just to I'll go ahead and repeat, since under the circumstances, this, I guess it's not quite as much of breaking news now, but NASA's planning on rolling the Artemis II vehicle back to the vehicle assembly building, which means the launch is no longer possible in March, and we're just gonna have to wait and see how the schedules lay out and the choices that they make, the options they choose to pursue, whether they choose to do a few more things in the vehicle assembly building, or whether they choose to, where they decide to do some of this work. They were setting up to do the contingency pad. They were setting up the contingency pad access system, these platforms. They'd actually hung one of the platforms on the mobile launcher last night. That's going to now have to be taken down. The reason they did that is because they need to retest the flight termination system. And that's a servicing and maintenance issue. They just built this. I don't want to call it a makeshift system because they spent a lot of time designing it, but it's very narrowly scoped. It gives them the ability to do a very narrow, small number of things at the pad. The vehicle's just not designed to be serviced and maintained at the pad. So, we're the reason that I say all of that is I don't think they've said that they haven't said whether or not. So it doesn't mean that April's off the table. It just means they have not said whether or not they believe what the earliest launch date is now. We're going to be waiting to hear what that assessment is and when it occurred. They may not be able to make that assessment in today. So we were talking about the Apollo mobile service structure. Pardon me. I can bring that back up again. The short answer is, I'll just bring it up but the answer is that it's not left there. It is not left there for launch. Yeah. So You can see, so the way that it worked is they rolled the Saturn V and the Apollo out to the pad, and you can see under here, you can see the crawler, one of the two crawler transporters. So what they would do is they would use that same unit, roll the vehicle out to the pad, lower it onto the pedestals just like they do now. You can say it's the other way around. SLS did it just like Apollo did and Shuttle before, but then it would go back to the park site for the mobile service structure and bring it over and set it up with the fixed service structure, with the Apollo launch umbilical tower, and then leave it there for some period of time. And then before launch, it would roll it back. It would take it all the way back to the park site. And the park site is where the launch, the LC-39 observation tower, the visitors complex tour stop. It's over in that area where the crawler way for pad A and pad B splits. So let's see if I can no, I'm not going to do it right now. I was going to go off and find it and pull it up in Google Maps. That's probably a little bit too much of a tangent right now. But let me bring up the live shot of the vehicle. I don't know that we're going to necessarily see. It might take a little bit of time, but that they are going to have to review they installed, at least to some extent, the first of the two contingency pad access platforms. They're going to have to remove that. They're going to have to bring the engine service platform back in and lift that up into the flame hull of the mobile launcher. They're going to have to roll back the side flame deflectors and extensible columns. And then at some point we will see the crawler, but that's probably, that could be maybe a day or two, or maybe a little bit more than that. It depends on how long it takes to get this. They're going to have to take the emergency egress system baskets. I mean, that will be quick to send them down the wires and park them at the terminus area, at the pad B perimeter. But then they have to take the lines down, the slide wire basket, those slide wires. They will have to take those down before they can roll back. Again, so there's some of the rollback preparations are not. Now, having said that, they are prepared to deal with a hurricane, and so they can do some of this. They can do some of this. I'm wondering if I could just be spacing on the service platform, but I'm sort of wondering if we may start to see. I don't know if the service platform could go in there first, but at any rate, the okay, just looking at. But so they have a requirement to be able to do that expeditiously, but it isn't hurricane season. Now, having said that, again, they're probably going to want to. They're probably going to want to do this expeditiously to some extent, because it is an exercise of you want to get back to the VAB and be in a position to repair the vehicle as soon as you can, as soon as possible. But then they're also, again, in the meantime, they need to figure out what else they want to do in the VAB. As I was mentioning earlier, maybe they decide to just go ahead and do the flight termination system retest in the VAB. They have more access to the vehicle in there. But then again, that's a trade-off too. So again, there are a lot of questions that still need to be addressed, I think. But it does so. But if rolling back takes March off the table for sure, we're going to have to see what happens with April, and everything else. I mean, the more generic question is, when do they think? What's the earliest they think what's the earliest launch period they think they could support. So launch period 19 would be April. Launch period 20 would be end of April, early May. We only have one of the dates in launch period 20. We were asking for the full set of dates for launch period 20. Again, not necessarily because anybody knew that this was going to happen, but just again in terms of in the name of being prepared and being able to being more aware of the situation in its entirety as much as possible. We're not. Some of it is proprietary, and so they can't give it all to us. But I think we feel like, again, speaking as one of those evil media people, we feel like we're on the other extreme. So we're not getting we're getting it's closer to 0 than 100. But again, I'll set that aside for all. I have other. I can whine on another day about that. So. But yeah, so the bottom line for right now, for the moment, is that it looks like they're going to be rolling back in the next few days, probably. And the big picture thing is that the March launch period is off the table. So the earliest just from a logistical or calendar standpoint, that's probably the bad way of saying it. March is off the table. The next possible opportunity, as opposed to whether it's available or not is still a question, is early April. And so, but we don't know how long this is going to take and what options they're going to choose. And so we will have to wait and see. Because even if they think they can get to April, then the obvious next question is, well, how much schedule margin do you have for launch period 19, which begins on April Fool's Day? And so, yes, somebody's asked that, but it is a good question. And I think that is another factor in when can they be ready to launch, which is, do they need to do, well, would it be prudent, or would it make sense to do some type of tanking test after the vehicle returns to the pad? I think it's a good question. It's been asked at least a couple of times in this live stream. I'm sure NASA will get asked about this. I'm sure while I've been talking, I don't know if there've been other posts. Again, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman has been good today about answering questions. He posted the first public notification about this. So what time was that? 3:30. So I think it's about 2 hours ago now. But he's answered questions, at least a couple of questions, a couple of important questions, just in terms of clarifying the situation. And but we're still waiting to get a little bit more. And again, to be fair, it's only been a couple of hours, but it does have the implications of the problem are these are big implications. It means there's a rollback because they can't fix it at the pad, which means that March is off the table, which means we now have to wait to see when the earliest, when the next possible opportunity is April. But do they have the ability to take advantage of that opportunity? And we may not find out. We may have to wait to find out when that is. So, whoops, lost the, well, I'll go ahead and that's the blog post. So, if you're keeping an eye on that, I was not planning on doing a lot of refreshes of this like we were during the wet dress rehearsal the other day. But if you go to nasa.gov/blogs plural / Artemis. You can get the latest update here. But again, because of the communications and disclosure situation that we're in, sometimes Jared Isaacman, the NASA administrator, is in the best position to say something the most expeditiously, the fastest, because he's in a position where he probably has to get some things cleared, but he has to get less information cleared to publish than somebody within, for instance, NASA Public Affairs. So, folks tend to have to be well prepared to speak extemporaneously. See, I can do it because I'm not with NASA and because I don't have any information, and that's not fair either. But anyway, the point is, I'm outside, so I'm just talking about stuff that we know from the outside, which is a tiny subset of the information that is theoretically available. But anyway, this is where you will see. So if you go to again, nasa.gov/blogs plural, so blogs / Artemis, to get updates. And again, if you're on social media, you can follow Jared Isaacman's official account is at NASA admin. So, but I mean, I will try to. So yeah, the thing is doing a full wet. So the folks are talking in the chat about what type of tanking test do you do? Because again, the wet dress rehearsal is a kind of tanking test. What they called it, the liquid hydrogen integrity test, or Public Affairs called it a confidence test last week. What was it? I think it was on February. They did it on February 12th. It's I think the question, doing a full wet dress rehearsal is more. It isn't so much that it's more work. I think it's more about how much additional work in terms of both preparation and cleanup afterwards. So. And I think one of the questions with the helium system with ICPS that they've had some issue with today is whether you need to run that test with ICPS, or is it because they don't understand the root cause of the tail service mast umbilical plate issue, the leak of hydrogen there. They were just talking about this yesterday in the post-test news conference, that they had a lot of confidence in the config that they are in right now post-test, but they're going to have to break that configuration, or break meaning they're going to have to breaking the configuration, meaning disconnecting the vehicle from the pad, and they're going to have to roll it back. And there is some question about whether rolling it back and forth, the loads that are put on the umbilical plate may contribute to the leaks issues that they've been seeing with the Artemis I vehicle and this Artemis II vehicle. And so again, one of those questions is going to be, I wanted to ask John Honeycutt yesterday if how seriously they're considering just going ahead and remating, either demating the umbilicals when they get to the pad and remating them, and doing what they just did a couple of weeks ago after the first wet dress rehearsal, if just preemptively going ahead and doing that when the vehicle comes back to the pad. And if so, would you do a tanking test, and how much of a tanking test do you need to do? Because I think, again, it'd be fun to get down into the weeds. For me, it would be fun to get down in the weeds of this, but I think there's some intuitive. The idea seems somewhat intuitive based on what we've seen, which is if you see an issue in fast flow or fast fill with liquid hydrogen, core stage liquid hydrogen, when you're loading the stage, if you're seeing a leak early, you're going to see it. You're going to see it late, or you're going to have an issue that you're going to have to deal with the entire day into terminal count. And if you don't see it early, then it's less likely you're going to see it late. And so if there's any wisdom or truth to that, then that there might be rationale which says, okay, we just need to do a partial hydrogen tanking test. We don't need to load the liquid oxygen systems. Those have all been essentially solid. Since I think the second wet dress rehearsal for Artemis I, they sort of got those procedures down for the liquid oxygen systems, and they really haven't had any issues that they haven't been able to deal with in all of the subsequent tankings of the vehicle. So could you do a partial test, which means it just takes less time to get out of, to back out of it, to inert you only have to inert one commodity on one tank. So, and so, yeah, that's, I think, the other question. Again, I've seen some whispering, or I've seen some, rumors that this is that, but we'll see. Again, how serious of an issue is this? So I do see some people saying in there, is it going to be easy to fix, or would they have to do something very drastic like destack? That would be obviously on the worst case scenario, in one of the worst case scenarios. If that happens, then you're talking about a long time, a much longer time than like a month or a couple of months. So, somebody's asking again, just talking about sort of authority or permission to, they don't have to get what they say approved, or at least there's a much smaller set of things that they have to get approved to say. So the NASA administrator, it isn't just Jared Isaacman, it's the NASA administrator in general. And they tend to be, they are judicious about what they talk about. But I think in this case, Mr. Isaacman is looking at the situation and people wanting to understand and wanting to be as as transparent as possible. Again, NASA is not fully transparent. And again, that's a political can of worms we can just set aside for today. He's trying to be as open as he can be, and he's at least being informative, letting people know, because this has huge impacts for folks who want to watch the launch in person, for instance, for people like me that are going to be covering the mission. But there's a difference even there. But obviously, yes, this is going to be, at some point, I'm going to have to reschedule my travel plans. I don't think it pushes. I don't think April is completely outside of spring break, but it probably isn't going to matter, because there's, we saw for February, folks want to go see this. I don't know if you would call it a silver lining or not, but I do know that there are people who would like to see this vehicle launch in the daylight, and so maybe that will happen now. I think there are still several of the windows in the launch period 19, which begins in early April, which are still essentially in darkness. So it's still not. You would have to get very close to the summer solstice here in the northern hemisphere to have sort of you do get to the point. Whereas in the winter you tend to have launch windows that are all at night, and then in the summertime you tend to have, it then switches the other way. And so you do get to a point, I think, with maybe a few months where all of the launch windows are in the daytime. So, but that won't be in April. And so the question is, will they have to? I think that the operative word there is have to. They don't have to destack the rocket to fix it. It's just that they probably do have to go back to the vehicle assembly building. They do not have the. They have essentially no access to the ICPS and to those helium, to the helium systems in the ICPS at the pad. So that's why they're talking about rolling back. So they can extend platforms to physically get access to it. There are access doors all around the circumference of the launch vehicle stage adapter, which is up here. It's the conical part. It's the connector between the SLS. The core stage is 8.4 meters in diameter. The ICPS is 5.1 meters in diameter, and so that's the LVSA connects the two, and also encapsulates the upper the ICPS, almost all of the ICPS. But yeah, they unfortunately have no ability to service the vehicle at the pad. So like previous systems in the past did. There were some things they could not do on shuttle at the pad, but the most complicated part of the vehicle was the orbiter, and they had pretty good access to the to things at the pad with the orbiter too. So, but in this case, no, they can't access the ICPS, and so they're going to have to roll back, extend platforms, open the access doors, multiple access doors on the LVSA. And then, they will have to confirm that their hypothesis about what's broken is. They'll obviously do a physical inspection of it. They may do some additional testing before they leave the pad to try and narrow things down. But they'll get hands on those systems, and do some additional testing. And then again, assuming that it's assuming that they can remove a part and replace it, or remove any parts that need to be replaced and replace them, and then retest them. And then obviously the other thing that they have to do, since they have to go back to the vehicle assembly building, is they have to be looking at the whole. There has to be a whole vehicle assessment, whole SLS vehicle, whole Orion. What other servicing and maintenance tasks need to be done? So the obvious one is the flight termination system reset. That still has to happen. Whether they could opt to do that while they're in the VAB, or they could opt to wait to come back out and use the contingency pad access system. They were just beginning to install that last night. The advantage, at least in my mind, I don't know if it's possible that it's a no-brainer and they're just going to do it on the VAB, but one advantage to doing it, to resetting the FTS at the pad, is it gives you gives you more time flexibility in terms of how much time you have until the system is, you have to do it again. You have to do another retest, which is somewhere between 28 and 35 days. So, we'll see. They may opt to replace. There are some batteries that have a 90-day wet life on them. Those would have probably been installed. They're not close to 90 days, but they may opt to go ahead and replace those and refresh, because they're going to, by the time they get back out to the pad, if they just stayed on these ones, they might start to push. April would probably start to push that 90 days anyway. So that might also be more of a no-brainer. It's like they may have to do that. They may have to replace some flight batteries on Orion and SLS. So, we will see. But there are going to be some additional maintenance tasks they're going to do, or at least would make sense for them to do. And we'll just have to, we'll have to see. Hopefully they will be forthcoming about kind of the scope of the maintenance tasks they're going to need to do in the VAB. And at least give us, an early idea about how long it's going to be before they are, when they're looking at rolling back out, and then because that will give us an idea about whether early April is even possible. So today's the 21st of February. If in order for them to in order for them to be ready to launch on April 1st, they probably would need to be back out by mid-March, so they probably only have, so that's, again, it sounds like a long time to April, but they probably only have about a 3-week window here, maybe something like that, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little less, but they probably have about a 3-week window here where they would have to get all of the servicing and maintenance tasks done and be back out at the pad if they were going to make the very beginning of that window. So again, I don't know that April is early April anyway is a no-brainer either. So I'm just scrolling back here to see. Yes, there will be time. There will be time. So yeah, Bill Harwood, and I completely agreed with what Bill Harwood and Irene Klotz said in the but I don't want to spend too much time on it. We will while NASA and Exploration Ground Systems is going to be very busy trying to get the vehicle turned around. I'm sure that they would desire to be able to be ready in the April window. We'll have to see, but they're going to be really busy. I will have time to complain more about the disclosure stuff, but I think I'm going to try not to dwell on that too much today, just because again this is still somewhat breaking news. It's only about 2 hours old, which is, at least in public anyway, which is that they found an issue on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage in the main propulsion system. They use helium to keep the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks pressurized, and they also use it to do purges for the RL-10 engine. And at some point last night, and this wasn't necessarily connected to the wet dress rehearsal, they saw an inability to pressurize through. I don't know if it's one line, but they saw some sort of an issue. They call, what are they calling it? Interrupted flow of helium. Again, I don't know how many of those lines there are in the system, but there are many helium bottles. Let me see if I can bring that up just to show you. This has probably been running in the background. But this is when the ICPS was stacked. Trying to get this to stop in a closer place. No. But those black bottles are... Well, this is, I suppose, good enough for the moment. I'll just see if I can freeze it here. But these black bottles are there. So there's several of them. Are the helium, where they store helium for the stage, and then they have obviously lines, main propulsion system lines that run where they need to run, and so it's it's possible it's possible it's only one helium bottle, or it could be at a manifold, or it could be we don't know. They haven't given us that much information, but if you look at renders, so again, they have taken the remove before flight protective coverings off of the helium bottles. You will often see in rendering, either in-flight renders or just generally speaking, you will see them in red because they are often rendered with the remove before flight coverings still in place. But here we can see they've removed them because the stage is going to be stacked and people aren't going to be around those. And we've seen some examples of where possible heavy-handed handling of CPOVs can lead to problems. And so, but in this case, they've removed them here, but you do often see them with protective coverings over them. But it's possible, again, it's maybe hard to see here, but again, it could be any one point in the system that has an issue. But it could also be, again, it could be at a junction like a manifold or something like that. So, but they saw something overnight last night, and I assume that they've decided it's broken, has to be fixed. And that means that they have to roll back to the VAB to fix it because they have no access to to the helium system at the pad. And then that obviously, because of that creates, they will have to redo pretty much the entire pad flow if they leave the pad. And that takes about 2 weeks all by itself. And so that's why it becomes an academic exercise that March is off the table. And so, again, we don't know what the earliest opportunity is. The next opportunity, the next lunar opportunity after March is April, but we still have to hear whether or not that is feasible, because we don't know how much work needs to be done in the VAB. We could probably figure out how much time, how much, preparation and cleanup time you have to do for rollback and roll out, to come up with sort of, well, they have to do all of this and there's this much overhead basically. But we don't know. We don't know when they can roll back out, and because that will to some extent drive when the earliest opportunity. We don't know whether they're going to do another tanking test. These are all good questions though. So. So I thought I went past a question. Um, and there's some questions about infrastructure, and I did talk about that earlier. I mean, I think again, it's a rhetorical question because there's no way it's going to be. But I think it's a reasonable question, because the reason that they're rolling back is because they have no ability to repair the vehicle at the pad. And again, I'm generalizing, but there's very little that they can repair at the pad. It just so happens that they could do repairs to the liquid hydrogen tail service mast umbilical, but they can't repair the ICPS. They can't repair, or they have very limited access inside the solid rocket boosters, especially up at the top. Relatively limited access even to the inner tank. That's what the contingency pad access system is. But they have no access to ICPS. They have limited access to, for instance, the Orion service module. And again, that's probably another one of those can of worms that I'm not, it's just too much of a tangent today. But I think it's obviously reasonable to talk about access to SLS, because this is, they're rolling back. You need access to fix this. They don't have access at the pad. They don't have the infrastructure for access at the pad. And so, it at least raises that question about why they have so little infrastructure for this. I mean, the obvious question is it's just too expensive. It's certainly judged to be too expensive, but I don't even think I don't think anybody even really seriously entertained the idea of having good infrastructure for this vehicle. It was kind of sold on being inexpensive because it was shuttle based at the time, that it would be, you could do it on a flat budget, and you could do it with minimal infrastructure, and you could do it, but again, having said that, it is worth pointing out that even when they're saying all of that, they were talking about only being able to fly twice in 4 years at the time. And that was these two missions that I've talked about for forever and ever: Exploration Mission 1, and Exploration Mission 2. So when these programs were stood up, the SLS program, and then Orion was uncanceled. So this is like 2011, 2012. The Exploration Mission 1 was like end of 2017, and Exploration Mission 2 was 2021. And so again, those two missions represent the uncrewed demo for Orion and SLS, and then this Exploration Mission 2, which is what we're now talking about, is now called Artemis II, is the crewed demo for this system. So anyway, again, going backwards from where going down the rabbit hole, minimal infrastructure, no ability to service the vehicle at the pad. They put all of that in the VAB. Obviously, the intent here was that you wouldn't need to do the servicing, but you then get into all of these issues. Again, this unit was delivered to the Kennedy Space Center in, I believe, mid 2021, and so that's maybe not quite 5 years, but it's been in storage for the better part of 4 years. It was stacked about less than a year ago, but I'm going to bring up the live shot again here, or try to. And so it is one of those things where you just, you certainly wonder if this part broke, in part because it had been in storage for a while, for a long while. So, there's that. And so, I mean, I do think, again, so there are other infrastructure issues, being, again, so they only have, again, when I say minimal infrastructure, again, they only have one location where they can do service and maintenance on these vehicles, especially fully assembled vehicles like this. They only have one place to stack them. And so the whole idea of having multiple SLS vehicles, being prepared for launch in parallel, they don't have the infrastructure to do that. Anthony's talking about, they only have one high bay in the VAB. They used to be, or are sometimes called integration cells, but they only have one place in the VAB. So as an example, Shuttle had two, High Bay 3 and High Bay 1. But High Bay 1, and again, this is the thing about, again, not being allergic to spending on infrastructure. Washington may not have anything against infrastructure, but they don't like spending money on it. And so High Bay 1 has basically sat as if it were a shuttle stacking museum. All of the shuttle platforms are still in there rusting away. I'm sure that they are maintained such that they don't become a safety issue, but Kennedy Space Center's never had enough money to actually just remove those. So you can't park. Well, I don't know. I don't know whether you could park this vehicle in High Bay 1. The pedestals, again, I don't even know if they've maintained the pedestals. You could obviously spend some money to refurbish those, but I'm not sure if this would fit in High Bay 1 with the shuttle platforms in there. So, it's things like that. And so, again, maybe it may still be that having minimal infrastructure makes the most sense, but I don't think they really ever, I don't know that it was even a consideration. It was just, they didn't have the money for it, so they never were going to spend any on it. So, yes. So somebody's asking, will the crew will come out of quarantine? I mean, again, I guess they haven't officially, or maybe they have behind the scenes. Again, I've gotten a couple of, I've heard some things on the phone. Well, let me actually, maybe I wonder if this really is. I wonder if this really is, maybe this is confirmation. Let me just check this email. I think it's somewhat of an academic exercise at this point. No, okay. They haven't officially said, no, again, I just think it's more of an academic exercise. If they were to, it would be as surprising at this point for them to say, nope, we don't need to go to the VAB. We can fix it at the pad. That would be as big a surprise at this point as this coming up at the time that it came up. So it really does. It really does seem like they're gonna. We just haven't, I think, gotten an official word, or we haven't seen something on the live view quite yet. But I think it's it's just sort of academic at this point. And so, yeah, it's a little, I mean, we haven't got a lot of detail, but what Jared Isaacman said in his posts, and I think is in the post, is that they didn't see this issue until last night. And in fact, it says it's the same thing, overnight, February 21st. Let me see if I can bring that up. So it says, this is the long and short of the blog post. So, it says, after the preamble, after overnight, February 21st, observing interrupted flow of helium in the SLS rocket's interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Pardon me. Helium flow is required for launch. That's kind of an understatement. A very generalized one too. It just makes me smile. But it also does mention in here, in order to protect for troubleshooting options at both Pad B and the VAB, teams are making preparations to remove the pad access platforms installed yesterday. I don't know that it doesn't look like they installed both of them, and I don't think the crane is set up to install both of them. I could be, again, maybe again, since we don't have a good view of this, I don't think they installed the other platform, which was the somewhat simpler. They're both relatively simple platforms. And so they're saying the platforms have wind-driven constraints and cannot be removed during high winds, and which I would also take to mean they cannot be installed during high winds. They have to be braced in place for weather. So, and so that there's a timing thing there. So if they're expecting weather tomorrow, then we would at least expect to see, assuming that rollback is somewhat of a certainty, we would expect to see them remove that, sometime today or maybe overnight. Again, I don't know exactly when the weather is expected to. When it's expected to arrive? Exactly what time tomorrow? So yeah, again, it's I'm sort of scrolling backwards a few minutes. Okay, it's mostly caught up. So I mean, yeah. So again, in Shuttle, and in Apollo, but I mean, Shuttle was a little bit less. But I mean, Shuttle had the two crawlers exist, but only one of them was reconfigured for SLS. It had to be upgraded. SLS is heavier because you have a instead of just a mobile launch platform, you have the entire umbilical tower. So again, the launch infrastructure, or not all of it, but again, the service tower for the vehicle. And again, unfortunately, it doesn't work so well in a day when the vehicle can't be quote unquote serviced at the pad to call it a service tower. The umbilical tower for this vehicle, it rides with it in and out of the VAB. For Shuttle, the umbilical towers were called service structures, fixed service structure, rotating service structure. Those were at the pad and stayed there. So if you look at the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy pad at pad A, they left up what was called in Shuttle the fixed service structure, just the tower. They demolished the rotating service structure. They demolished the rotating service structure and fixed structure here. But for shuttle, they had 2 high bays, 2 integration cells, so they could stack 2 vehicles simultaneously. They had 2 crawlers so that I wonder if I have that picture. Actually, they weren't using both. Let me take a look. But you could move 2 shuttle vehicles on the mobile launch platforms simultaneously, maybe not, but I mean, you could be ready to roll them, one after the other. There is one of those famous pictures, and I wish there was famous video of the 2 of them outside the VAB. I mean, I could probably, if I don't have it, I was just in the wrong place. So let's see. Can I? Let me see if will this come up for me? No, it won't because I have the wrong. But I can do this. I think. Okay, that was fast. All right. So you can kind of see it here, but you can see in this picture, you can see one of the trucks for one of the crawlers here and the other crawler here. So and this over here is the edge of the VAB. So again, this sort of demonstrates to some extent because this, and again, because of the chines on Columbia. So this is very definitely Columbia, and because this is STS-38, or no, I have it backwards. Because this is STS-35, this is STS-38, and that's Atlantis. But anyway, this shows you this shows you a lot of the infrastructure in one shot. Because this vehicle, the STS-38 vehicle is parked in front of High Bay 1, and the STS-35 vehicle, I keep doing this, I'm highlighting the wrong window, but this vehicle is being rolled out of High Bay 3, and I won't go any farther into the rabbit hole of shuttle severe trivia history, but still, again, this what does SLS have? SLS has, and again, I don't know whether this is CT1 or CT2, but SLS has 1 crawler transporter that can be used for a stack, and it has 1 high bay 3. So this STS-38 vehicle is parked in front of High Bay 1. That is, you couldn't even say that it was, well, I guess retired is fair. They retired High Bay 1. The shuttle platforms were never removed from it. They're still, they're just rusting away as far as I know. I'm sure that they, if they were a hazard, if they were a safety hazard and they were going to come down, they would probably have to spend the money to do it, but they don't even have enough money. Again, I remember asking Bob Cabana, who's a former astronaut, but was the Kennedy Space Center center director at the time, and this was like 2012, asking him about High Bay 1, and I think he basically indicated to me the gist of what he said of his response was, we don't have, he probably said something along the lines literally of, we don't have the money to do that, or something along those lines. But the way he said it, I almost got the feeling that he wanted to say, we're never, ever going to have the money to do that. And 15 years is good enough for never, ever in this type of work. It's the world is completely changed from 2011 or 2012 to today. So anyway, and they did. So yes. And so what happened is that there, for a short time, they leased High Bay 1 to SpaceX, but I don't think SpaceX ever quite got into it. And I don't know if any, money, or whether they actually ever signed a lease agreement, but they at least came to a verbal agreement to do that. And then I think mutually decided not to do that. Because if you look at what SpaceX is doing now for Starship, yes, they're setting up they're setting up Pad 39A to be a Starship launch pad, but I think they're going to build, but you see where the Gigabay is being built out on off of State Road 3, off of Kennedy Parkway. So they're building their infrastructure away from the VAB. And I think, again, one of those constraints for usage of High Bay 1 was that SLS was the, you know, you if you were doing something and SLS needed the priorities to, clearing high bays, clearing the VAB for whatever safety reason, SLS got the priority. And I think for that and other reasons, I think SpaceX, it makes more sense to me, and obviously did to them, that it's like, okay, we could use that space, but it's going to be, it has strings attached to it, and it probably makes more sense to do something somewhere else. And so I guess, the upshot of that is High Bay 1 is just sitting there unused, except it's just being used as a storage area. I think they store equipment on the floor, but again, you could not store. I was asking about this, but I mean, I don't know that you'd want to put an SLS vehicle in there, even if you had the clearances to do that. I don't know that it needs to be renovated, and the platforms coming out would be a good idea. But again, I think it just says a lot about the minimal infrastructure spend at these centers, that they aren't even willing to renovate it. Yeah. And so, yeah, Roberts Road, Roberts Road is it's funny to me to call it a cross street, but it's essentially cross street for on Kennedy Parkway, it's one of the intersections off of Kennedy Parkway. But yeah, so it's south of the Launch Complex 39 area, but it's in the Kennedy Space Center area. So it's possible, again, that this broke, this broke fast enough that they hung that contingency pad access, and you can't really see it very well. This is not the best angle for it. If you go back and look, I don't know if you can go back far enough in the Spaceflight Now or the NASA Spaceflight Space Coast live streams, but you could see it if you watched those live streams last night. But it's possible that the crane crews and the crews that did that work last night are, they can't work continuously, so they have to get, they may not be able to come in again until, if they were working third shift last night, the overnight shift, then they probably are going to have to do that again tonight. So, but yeah, so I think I saw some questions about, could you fly? So I'm trying to remember. I think, was it Flame Trench, or actually I think it was during the while I was doing the wet dress rehearsal live stream on NSF NASA Spaceflight, and EJ was on there, and he was answering a question about why don't you use Dragon to go to the moon, and it's not designed. It's not currently designed. Just because it's not designed doesn't mean it can't be. But then the flip side of that is, it's not currently, you can't just launch it to the moon right now, unless you're going to basically write waivers saying you're going to waive a bunch of safety requirements to do that. It could be modified, or you could build a mission module. So yeah, you could probably use the Dragon and Falcon systems to build something, but it would be an Earth orbit rendezvous architecture type of thing. So you'd have to do the mods on Dragon to rate it for lunar. You would need additional storage space if you're going to meet the Orion requirements, because again, Dragon only has to support crew for maybe a week's worth of time, and that's important because of how much volume food and water and other provisions take. If you just set aside the radiation requirements or the different environmental requirements in deep space versus in low Earth orbit. But you would need to go from 1 week, or maybe a little bit longer than a week. You need to be able to support 4 crew members for 3 weeks, for 3 continuous weeks, or 3 weeks of time. So if you wanted to do the 3 weeks in over the span of 4 weeks, that's fine. Or 3 weeks in the span of 6 months, you could do that too. But you have to be able to support the crew completely standalone for 3 weeks, for 21 days. So, I mean, obviously Dragon supports 4 crew right now. But you need to do that, and then obviously Dragon doesn't have a single Falcon Heavy does not have enough performance. I don't know if it has enough performance to get Dragon to the moon or not. But once you start introducing all of the other things, the way that you'd have to do it is you would have to you might be able to use a single stick to launch a Dragon into into low Earth orbit, but then you need a fairly spacious or spacecraft mission module, lunar mission module, to take it to the moon. Again, it's not impossible, but it's just not. You can't just snap your fingers. This again is along the lines of rockets aren't Legos. You can't snap them together like that. It takes longer to do stuff like that. So it's the difference between there's a huge gray area between impossible and possible. But again, we're also talking about how quickly could you do that? I don't know. It might take as long as it's going to take to get Blue Moon and Starship ready to do those lunar landing demos. So, Artemis, it's a good question about the Artemis III schedule. It certainly doesn't affect the lunar landers at all. Those are independent. But it does make you wonder, and it does not affect the Artemis III production schedules right now. This is an ICPS thing. This is again, and I'm speculating, but I would be surprised if this is a design issue with ICPS. I just think, again, as I was saying, this stage laid or stood or this stage was in storage from 2021 through for almost 4 years, and so the point being, this probably doesn't necessarily have any impact on the Artemis III ICPS, except I would imagine they'll go check it. It doesn't slow down production of the SLS core stage for Artemis III or the Orion spacecraft for Artemis III, but you're now drifting into the middle of 2026, and so how long would it take if you were just going to turn around and stack another vehicle? What's the earliest that vehicle could be ready? The farther into 2026 you go, the less and less likely. Again, even if it's just an academic exercise, you're now probably talking about it starts to become almost. I guess I don't want to exaggerate here. I just think it's becoming more and more difficult to fly another vehicle. If you just wanted to, for no other reason than that. In 2027, maybe not yet, but I think by the time you get to the middle of this year, it'd be very difficult to turn around and fly another vehicle without a lot of modifications or refurbishment by the end of 2027. Again, I don't want to say it's impossible, but again, you have to realistically, we don't even know what they would do with flying another mission by the end of 2027. But I think what's ending up happening is it's making a bigger problem for the gap between Artemis 3 and Artemis 4, because Artemis 4, now we get into this infrastructure thing. So if we just assume if this is contributing to taking Artemis an interim mission like an Artemis 2.5 mission off the table, and again, I'll set aside the argument of whether or not that was already off the table or not. If we're just now going to say, okay, the Artemis 3 vehicle is going to be prepared for launch in 2028, and it'll kind of be ready second half of 2028. So this wouldn't interrupt that. It goes towards taking anything earlier than that off the table. But if you do that and you push Artemis 3 to the second half of 2028, that's where Artemis 4 was. And so that's using a different mobile launcher, and it's using a different SLS vehicle, different SLS build, and Orion build. And so does that just automatically delay Artemis 4 to, whatever, end of 2029, 2030? How do you juggle juggle Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 because you're not, you don't have the infrastructure to some of the things we were just talking about. You don't have the ability to stack the Artemis 3 vehicle and stack the Artemis 4 vehicle. I mean, the launch pad is kind of the least of the worries in a way. It's the fact that you don't have any other infrastructure. Even the crawlers, you could probably work around the fact that, you could, in theory, you could use, and they're going to have to, because that's all that they can afford. You can use Crawler Transporter 2 to juggle, so to speak, mobile launchers. But it's already, again, that's the thing is I think to be fair, that's already kind of the baseline. If Artemis 3 went to quote unquote by 2028, they've already been thinking about this for a handful of months, at least since October. They've already had this in their heads of, okay, Artemis 3's end of 2028. We'd been scheduling Artemis 4 for September 2028. They've already had to be thinking about what they're going to do about this. So this just makes it probably more of an academic exercise. It's like this is the longer that it takes to launch Artemis 2 in 2028. Not right now, Mom.
Oh, just went up.
Okay. Hi, Mom. That's my mom. The longer it takes to launch this mission, and we already might be there, although April, you could make an argument in April, but I think we're already close, if not already there. It's like it's just there. The earlier in 2026 they flew this mission, the at least perhaps left that option on the table. But again, you could make the argument that option was off the table already. So, yeah. So, Mom takes care of me and I take care of Mom. Mom takes care of Teddy too. But Mom takes care of Teddy, and Mom gives me a place to live. And so I'm helping her be in her 80s, and she's helping me not be able to afford to not live on the streets in Southern California. But yeah, I think, if you're being realistic about this, I think I don't know things like this. I don't know how shocking this is. It's certainly, the timing of it is probably more shocking than the reality of it. I mean, it's too bad, but I mean, there's a constant risk of this, about having a lot of this hardware just sitting on the shelf for years, that you have just random part breaks. And again, I think I was saying this towards the beginning of the live stream. If this stage, whatever part this was that broke might not have broke until 2026. So if, it might have been fine in 2024. So yeah, I mean, and so yeah, I'm trying not to do too much politics today, but I think it's worth reminding folks. It's like, unfortunately, this is it's too simplistic to say this is all we have at the moment, but it is it's like there isn't really anything, because it's a government requirement, but there isn't really anything that's ready to replace this yet. So we were talking about Dragon and Falcon. Maybe if there was no such thing as Starship, maybe SpaceX, maybe Musk would have gone down that path. He started to go down that, but I think, maybe even a decade ago, I think he was probably already. You can certainly see the way things have gone. He made that choice a long time ago that not that Dragon and Falcon are dead ends, because I don't think it's such a lucrative and such a high performing, especially Falcon, but Dragon has also been really good. But I think it's fair to say, certainly SpaceX thinks that Starship is better than those systems and will eventually get to there. It's just right now Starship's not ready to replace Falcon. That's perhaps another way of putting it. So, but then if you're talking about lunar capabilities, there's the market for that is still pending, so to speak. And so the government has decided that they wanted to use this system and build this system, have their own system to fly people to the moon. And so, and if they're not willing to pay somebody else to do it, the people like Musk and Jeff Bezos are, I don't know if you want to call them unicorns, but you might. It's like, I don't know that I don't know that there's necessarily going to be, there are always going to be trillionaires and billionaires that are interested in spending the money on this. It's very expensive. So anyway, the point being, there isn't anything ready to replace this system, even with how, even as we say this, a system that has not actually flown people to the moon yet. But there isn't anything else in this position right here, even if we're now talking about what, six weeks from launch instead of 2 weeks or something like that. There isn't anything 6 to 8 weeks, the old 6 to 8 weeks thing again. So it is doable, but again, somebody has to pay for it. And since the government's not willing to pay for it, then the only options are these other two billionaire, government-sized benefactors, Musk and Bezos. So, and I think Bezos wants to do that at some point, but again, Blue Origin's going to have its hands full coming up with an Artemis III lunar lander in the next 3 years, and SpaceX is going to have its hands full getting Starship ready. SpaceX is with the additional ambition of continuing to do everything that they're doing with Falcon and probably increasing the launch rate for that, and simultaneously building Starship up to eventually surpass it. So, which I think is one of the many ambitious things that they're doing. So, yeah. So yes, not to dwell on, but let's see. I've ended up back here. So this is when I was a kid. Most of growing up was here in the Southern California area, and then I ended up in San Diego for a little while, and then I ended up in Portland, Oregon for a little while. I ended up back here for a little while. Then was in Atlanta, and then I came back here. So I've been all over the place, and I think it would be great. But I think I'm sure lots of you know about elder care and things like that, and she's doing better than I'm sure she's doing way better than I'll be doing when I get to her age. But whereas she used to be able to take care of all of us, the pets and a dad and another brother, in her sleep, it's harder for her to do some of these things now. So now I can actually help her. Whereas I used to be too lazy to do anything. So, but if you're just talking about economically, again, this is a tangent and I'll stop after this, but it would have been better for me to stay in Atlanta than to move back to Southern California, but I could do that because the rent here is $0. Yes, I will have to at some point here, but I think 2 hours after this, it doesn't look like we're getting a lot of new news, but I think what I had originally planned on doing was doing a members live stream today when there was no breaking news. But I figured in this case, it made sense to do something a little more broadly. But probably what I will do is, especially if we're sort of waiting to see what happens, is I'd planned on doing a public live stream around this time tomorrow, and so I took that one down because I need to change the title and all of the other stuff on it. But I'll plan on coming back tomorrow somewhere around now, midday ish, to see where things are. But yeah, I mean, I think from the timing standpoint, I think that's probably the most sort of shocking thing is apparently what we're hearing is that this came up somewhat or mostly or completely independently of the wet dress rehearsal. It's possible that this is one of those things that they reestablished some flows on the ICPS after the wet dress rehearsal, but the ICPS would have been just like SLS and Orion when they counted down to 33 seconds in the terminal countdown run and then cut off at 29 seconds in the second one. In both cases, ICPS, we didn't hear about any launch commit criteria violations in that time. So on Thursday night, it was ready to launch twice. And then it's just one of those unfortunate things where, it's also possible, again, talking about, the stage being in storage for a long time, you get into these situations where you had the hydrogen leak at the beginning of this month. Let's say for whatever reason, they have rolled this vehicle out with the tail service mast umbilical plates mated and then tanked the vehicle and not had a hydrogen leak. It's inconsistent. So they haven't been able to consistently do that or consistently leak either. But anyway, the point being, if for some reason that wet dress rehearsal on Groundhog Day had gone well, maybe they launch and this problem never happens because this is obviously an expendable stage. But because they had that delay, then that keeps them on the ground for another month. We'll find out. Well, maybe we'll find out, but it is possible that, again, if this stage had been used, 2-3 weeks ago, it may not have exhibited that problem, and it certainly didn't exhibit the problem during terminal count on Thursday night, and they did 2 of those. But for whatever reason, they're saying they saw this overnight last night. They did not see it overnight Friday night. Oh no, wait a minute. I think I'm conflating things. So that is it though. It was the first night after the wet dress rehearsal night, but this is over 24 hours after the wet dress rehearsal completed. So we didn't hear anything about this. They did the press conference a little more than 24 hours ago now. And so there was no word of this. And again, the other thing in terms of just looking at this circumstantially, they hung one of those contingency pad access platforms up on the mobile launcher umbilical tower last night. If they had some inkling that they were going to roll back when they did that last night. So this is it was after sunset last night. So this would probably be, I don't know, I can't remember looking at it, whether it was 7 or 8 p.m. It could have been later than that, but they continued doing that last night. If they had any advance notice of this, they probably would have opted not to do this, because then they wouldn't have to. Now they have to take it down. So anyway, it just, again, a lot of what do you call it, butterfly effect things here. But for whatever reason, the issue here, and again, I think it's just random timing for a failure. We'll see. Again, I don't know that they know exactly what happened, but the long and short of it is something broke. They can't fix it they can't fix it at the pad. Certainly that's what they're telling, that's everything we've heard so far. They can't fix it at the pad. So they're going to have to roll back, and it's going to take a little while. I guess, I think probably what they're thinking about here is, one of the things they mentioned in the blog post is that, they can't be doing crane operations and lift operations in high wind cases. So, But I think probably what they're doing now is they're trying to figure out how to how to do the rollback preparations. And again, as I mentioned before, they have to be ready to do a hurry up rollback in the case of a hurricane. Obviously, not going to see that in February, but they would do an expeditious rollback preparations. And so maybe what they're going to do here is, and rather than just dive into those, they may be sort of trying to orchestrate and coordinate what they're going to do, and line up the schedules to do that, and try and do it as efficiently as possible. I think I was looking at a bird, but so they have several things that they have to take down. The slide wire baskets themselves, the emergency egress system baskets, they can probably just release those. So those will only take a couple minutes to bring down to the terminus area, but they have to disconnect the slide wire basket wires. So the wires themselves have to be disconnected from the mobile launcher umbilical tower. That's not quite, that takes more than a few minutes. They'll, and some of these other things I think are probably less time consuming. Taking the platform down, they'll have to do that. They're going to have to retract the side flame deflectors and the extensible columns that are underneath the mobile launcher deck right now. They'll have to roll the engine and booster service platforms back in and lift those up into the flame hole for the mobile launcher, and those will ride back with the mobile launcher to the VAB. And then obviously they are going to have to bring the crawler in that's the last step, is to bring the crawler in underneath the deck and get ready to pick it up and roll it. But that's one of the later steps. So, and so, yeah, that's somebody's asking, did they put up the pad access structures? It looks like they put up one of the platforms for sure, and they just did that last night. So the amount of time between hanging the first platform and seeing this issue may have been just a couple of hours. Again, I don't know whether if there was any overlap at all, but I think, you see this, you want to see if, I don't think when they first saw this, they were thinking rollback. It's just, you try and come up with, is it an issue that you can resolve without having to do anything physically hands-on? So they probably tried some troubleshooting. They probably, obviously are going to be calling up folks and bringing support on, online to talk about, how do we fix this? And I think after talking about it for a while, they're like, yeah, we can't. They've probably exhausted any repair, quote unquote, repair options at the pad, and they're just like, yeah, we can't fix this at the pad. We can't fix this remotely, through commanding. We have to get hands on, we have to get hands on it and physically replace it. Again, I'm somewhat speculating here, but I mean, I think that's, given the fact that we're hearing they're talking about rollback, that's what this is. So, but yeah, so somebody was asking that was the first question. And then Jared Isaacman did clarify. So, the statements just said, actually, I think I can't remember which, it may have been his first post. He just said, during overnight data review, or maybe it was a NASA statement, but that was one of the first questions that we asked them was, what are you talking about? Are you talking about overnight data review of overnight review of wet dress 2 rehearsal, or, wet dress 2 data, or overnight review of live data? And so they clarified overnight review of live data. So, yeah, I'm sure it's, yeah, I'm sure, like, I think the closer you are to this, the more disappointing this is. I mean, I feel bad for those folks that they, because this is a this is a pretty good whip around from, especially listening to them talk, about this time 24 hours ago. They were obviously they seemed very happy about the results of the wet dress rehearsal. They were willing to talk about launch dates. It was, that I think was telling that they were at least willing to say we're shooting for the 6th. It is funny though that it's like, I think I don't know. I've heard some people talking about, too soon, not to say dates. I find it funny. I find it funny that speaking dates could break an ICPS part, for instance. If somebody has that type of power, maybe it's unharnessed power, but still, I just don't like. I don't think these systems are operated so close to the margins that you have to worry about magic. I think you just have to worry about regular old engineering. So I don't think, they should be able to talk about dates. They should have been able to talk about dates 2 months ago or 4 months ago. I think, it just doesn't, the issues don't have to do with dates. I think obviously that's not what they're worried about. They're worried about managing expectations. But that's a lot. You're not using a huge amount of brain cycles, but I don't know that you need to worry about using a whole bunch of brain cycles worrying about managing expectations. They got plenty of stuff to worry about right now. You just have to deal with, you just have to deal with what you have to deal with. So, there's always going to be a launch date, and there's no guarantee that when, I said it during I said it on Thursday, and I still was of the same opinion even after the press conference yesterday. I still don't know that you can go into any tanking of this vehicle knowing for sure that that you're gonna get through it cleanly like they did on Thursday. I would certainly, the fact that they saw such low numbers, I would be more confident, but I don't know that I would ever go close to 100% confidence. You'd want to see this vehicle fly. And you're probably, again, let's set aside the flight rate and all of that. But you'd want to see this vehicle fly half a dozen times, more than that, before you start to just feel confident that your things have become routine. So anyway, you just can't, this is hopefully, hopefully we don't see any more of these, but I think that has been said multiple times now. You just have to be ready to go. You keep getting ready, and you keep getting closer and closer to T0, and you need to be ready every time you try and do that. So, and so there are going to be, I don't know where you'd put it on Polymark in terms of, what are the odds this is the last delay. But I don't think saying something like that, I have no power over whether this is the last delay or not. But you have to wonder. So, and I don't think wondering it means anything. It's like, I see some folks talking in chat about their favorite NFL teams. It's like, if any random game, there's thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, or in some cases, like for the Super Bowl, millions of people actively rooting hard for bad things to happen to the other guys. And so there's no collective power in that, I don't believe. So if you're talking about, let's see who, I'm spacing on the quarterbacks right now, but I shouldn't be because, but there's people rooting for quarterbacks to throw interceptions. There's people rooting for, again, I'm older. And so, you used to hear, again, people weren't serious, but you used to hear people talk about it. Rooting, they hated the Yankees and they rooted for their plane to crash. That never happened, no matter how much people hated them and rooted for their plane to crash. So they don't do that right now, but just, again, different world, but cause that was a joke, but still the point is, there is no power. Maybe there is personal power, but again, I don't think there's any there's not as much magic as we wish there was. So, um, all right, and I'll get off that tangent too. But I think let's see. Yeah, and so yes, exactly. I do think again that's the pretty it's a very that's a whipsaw if there ever was one to go from. I mean, in less than 24 hours, but to go from the high of thinking you have a vehicle, and I mean, I was putting together a video yesterday, and I'll still do it because I do think the point's valid, but I can't talk about obviously March anymore, and so I'm going to have to go in and change that a little bit. But I mean, at least in my opinion, the points are still valid about the coverage that they had on Thursday, but it's also irrelevant today. But I'm going to have to, when I woke up this morning, so even, 5-6 hours ago, I was, obviously after yesterday and the press conference for sure, but just, even after Thursday, it's like you're thinking about, I was starting to think about getting ready to go back to Florida for the pre-launch. So, so yeah, that's to go from that. And now you're talking about rollback, and you're talking about now you have to wait to see perhaps when is the realistically the soonest that they can launch again. I don't know that we know that right now. I'm sure somebody internally has probably already run the numbers out, and at least to have some sort of an idea. Yeah, again, that's my opinion. I don't think you can jinx. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of who would have the power to jinx a launch by saying scrub. Maybe somebody really close to the proverbial button, but I don't believe that there's a collective power, because if you're talking, given how tribal things are right now, there are people who don't like Falcon and don't like SpaceX. And vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have to, I would assume it's much more likely that saying that you can't scrub a launch by saying scrub than that there's nobody rooting for random launches to scrub. There are probably lots more people rooting for them to scrub. And so far, I think they've been, you would have to call those coincidences. So, because again, you could say the same thing as about my sports analogy, which is if you're rooting for the other team to lose, when they lose, does that mean it's because you rooted for them? If the kicker misses the kick, if the kicker goes wide right or wide left with the kick or hits the goal, again, I'm using the American football, but you hit the uprights or the crossbar. Is that because the fans were rooting for that or not? Um, I don't know how much it costs to roll the vehicle back. Um, that's a whole other can of worms. There's all sorts of different conversations you have there. I don't think we have. That's probably too much of a tangent. But again, it just depends on how you calculate things. Everything here, everything here is paid for on screen, and all of the, so all the people are paid for, this is one way to do it. All the people are already paid for the year. All of the equipment and the servicing is paid for the year. You might argue that the actual flight hardware is not paid for the rest of the year, but I don't, the marginal cost of keeping this stuff in, either literal storage, or if you want to call this figurative storage, I don't know what the marginal costs are, or incremental costs, or whatever you call that, to keep the vehicle on the ground. But like all of this stuff, the mobile launcher is still going to be there after launch. All the people are still going to be there. You're still going to have to pay all of them. You're still going to have to pay to keep all of it maintained. So it depends on how much there's some expendable, commodities and things like that. But they were going to have to they're going to have to reposition the mobile launcher after launch. So you're going to have to do more than that. So yeah, there's probably a cost of gas and things that you're going to expend. But I don't know that it's terribly expensive. It's the accruing that cost over long periods of times where you get into the issues. And so you do have opportunity costs. Again, you wonder if that comes into this with the ICPS, with this whatever part or parts or issues that are broken or need to be replaced. Whether, I mean, I forget about a year ago. Again, the opportunity cost of having the hydrogen leak at the beginning of the month. You wonder if, again, this butterfly effect thing, if you don't have that hydrogen leak, and they launch, does ICPS hold up? Because that part worked all the way through. It worked through the first wet dress rehearsal fine. They then counted down twice on Thursday. Whatever they were seeing, whatever they then subsequently saw, they were not seeing during the terminal count on both terminal counts on Thursday night. So this broke after that. And so if Thursday night had been a launch attempt, and they flew, it would have that stage would have already done its job by now. So that's so yeah, it's one of those things. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see now. I know that I think I'm probably one of the few people. I take that back. There's a fairly tight knit group of media organizations that do that concentrated, like NSF, NASA spaceflight coverage of Starbase and Starship. But I have heard having Flight 12 and this fly close together would there'd be some logistical issues. For me, it wouldn't, specifically, but that would be a that would be a challenge logistically for those to be one on top of the other. But I also probably, if I had to guess, those will be deconflicted just naturally. It's very unlikely. It would be a huge coincidence for those to fly right on top of each other. Well, I think so. One of the things somebody's asking how I am. I mean, the I don't know if you call it a silver lining, but it's a lot easier to find out about this. Again, I'd rather find out about this than having already taken a plane to Florida, checked into a hotel in Florida. Thank goodness for refundable reservations, and so that it's just I'm used to, I'm old, so I'm not as shocked by the problem as by the timing of it. The timing of this happening. I mean, this could have happened before the wet dress rehearsal, or this in theory could have happened the vehicle rolled out to the pad more than a month ago in theory, or this could have happened after the first wet dress rehearsal, and so it's somewhat, the timing is random. Okay, we see the crane, it is interesting here, but so obviously either a crane crew or the crane crew has come back, and so it looks like we're seeing that move, so they may be getting ready to remove that contingency pad access platform that they just set up. I mean, the blog post I think did say something. Let me go look at that again. But it did say something about essentially, well, no, they said best path forward as opposed to, but I mean, I think there is still some sense of urgency. I don't think it removes any sense of urgency, but I mean, I'm just not, I think realistically, this is not I don't, it's realistically, this is not, it's not a big surprise, but the timing of it, absolutely. So absolutely, completely surprised by the timing of this. But in terms of sort of practically speaking, I can be ready, practically, or just purely in terms of what does this mean for me? It means I have to reschedule all of those reservations. So I'll have to do that at some point. It means I'm going to have to, but I mean, I can be ready to do this in April or in May. And again, I don't know that I would call it a silver lining, but, I wouldn't pass up an opportunity to launch this vehicle at night, because it's been such a long time. If they have if they have a night launch opportunity, they should take it. But it would be cool to see a daytime launch. I guess another way of saying it is I wouldn't wait until the summertime to launch this just to get a daylight launch. But if it turns out that they coincide that way, and I also think that, again, bigger picture, this is already starting to contribute to, if it had not already, we talked about this a little while ago, about if this doesn't take a sort of an Artemis 2.5 off the table, or if it wasn't already off the table, it's starting to make that not possible, or again, or it's like there will be other dominoes that will have to fall to see something like that. But all the questions about Artemis 3 and Artemis 4, I think that's perhaps the thing I'm looking forward to most is focusing on Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 after this mission, because I do think once it flies that they have the mission and operations infrastructure to do that well, and I think the operations teams are ready to fly. They just have to get the hardware, everything has to be ready to fly at the same time. So, but, as much as I have complained about the lack of disclosure for, in the last couple of months for Artemis II, it's exponentially worse. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but it's even more frustrating when you're trying to ask questions about Artemis 3 and Artemis 4. And obviously, since you have companies that are, fully secretive, it's really unfortunate. But I mean, it's hard not to lump SpaceX and Blue Origin in with the Chinese Communist Party because they operate the same way. And so, yeah, that's more frustrating. And I was hoping and am hoping that once Artemis 2 flies and everybody is focused on Artemis 3 and maybe Artemis 4 or whatever you want to call those, Artemis 2.5 and Artemis 3.5 or something, that people will be willing to talk about that stuff now. I've said it a bazillion times, but Starship, the progress on Starship or the progress on Blue Moon are completely independent of each other and independent of the Orion and SLS. There's nothing keeping them from telling us what's going on except their own whatever motivations for keeping everything secret. But it has nothing to do with this vehicle. And so again, and to put this into today's terms, this delay to Orion and SLS will not help Starship or Blue Origin unless you're talking about it politically. And again, then that isn't an engineering or math equation. That's a perceptions. Now we're talking about magic. Now we're talking about magic. So maybe it does, it's possible that changes, that it slightly changes the political equation, but this doesn't help. This hurts, this isn't good for Orion and SLS, but it doesn't help anybody else. Especially things that are completely unrelated to them. So, that is. But yeah, it's hard not to look at how secret China is and how secret the private companies here are. It isn't just SpaceX and Blue Origin. It's at this point it's like everybody. So if you look at the Orion and SLS contractors in terms of other contracts that they do, they're the same way as the Chinese Communist Party as well. so yeah, I mean they're very much like secret military operations. And then the thing again, that's the unfortunate thing about NASA is rather than having what NASA's doing and the contractors become more open and more public, NASA is becoming more secretive and more like a military operation. So, and to be fair, since the consensus, generally speaking, is that people want to spend less money on this and want business to do more. That's part of the bargain. So, you're if you don't want to pay for it, then you have to let them observe their proprietary, their non-disclosure, their intellectual property. But I mean, there are some lines there. I don't know that schedules are intellectual property. That's more just PR. Let's see. Do you think the press conference would not have happened if WDR was not proceeding? Well, yeah, because they did one immediately after the first one with the hydrogen leak. And so they will probably do something. I don't know when, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do a press conference this next week and talk about what but they probably won't do one until they have a better idea about their plans, until they've laid out a little bit of a schedule. It's not a guarantee they're going to do a press conference, but I'm sure people will. There are a ton of questions, and I'm sure that they will be asked to do a news conference after this, after now that they're rolling back and all of the implications and consequences of this. I'm sure they will be asked to do a press conference. So yes, I'm. They would. I don't think they're. It wouldn't. Just after a wet dress rehearsal, regardless of a typical outcome from a wet dress rehearsal, if you're talking about an extraordinary outcome from some sort of test like that, then yeah, maybe you have an extraordinary response to it. But just whether or not the performance was within family or not. Yeah, I would have been surprised if they didn't, especially after doing one after they had the hydrogen leak back on Groundhog Day. They did a press conference 12 hours after they ended that test, and they basically did the same thing again on Friday lunchtime after the Thursday night test. So. And so it isn't and that's the thing. It isn't doing a press conference or not. It's how often you do press conferences, how many questions you take. So yeah, I'm happy that they did a press conference yesterday, but I'm not quite as happy that they didn't stick around long enough to let me ask a question. So I was in the question queue yesterday. But they only gave that an hour. Again, this is one of those things where I don't know if the press conferences I was at the previous two, because I happened to be in Florida. In neither case did they tell us we have a hard out after an hour. So if you don't get your question in an hour, maybe that's because they don't want to talk about it. But it's like, if you don't get your question in within the hour, you're screwed. Again, not a big picture, but it's like, so the opportunity to ask that question is gone. And so that's the problem I have, is we don't get, and again, not to go too far into this, because I said I wouldn't, but just because you make a opportunity available doesn't make how you judge whether you have overall good opportunities and a good opportunity to understand what's going on. It's about how often you do it, how regularly you do it, how open you are to questions. Again, this goes back to probably before Apollo, but there's the whole idea of, in a press conference, I can ask the question, but I can't force you to answer it. And so if I ask a question, they can talk about their Super Bowl picks if they want to. There's nothing illegal about that. So it doesn't have to necessarily be on relevant to the question, the response. That's why we call them responses as opposed to answers, is because they're not obligated to either. And that's the thing. And to be fair, sometimes I will ask questions when I know that they're not going to, that are not answerable. But the point is trying to better understand where they are for unanswerable questions. So. No, I think so. Can Raptor's talking about. I understand what you're saying, but I also think that the perceptions are coincidental to what happened last year. I think it's much more realistic that, again, Elon Musk was in the White House in the what do you call it? But I mean, he was in Trump's inner circle. I mean, it was a joke to call him President Musk, but it's only funny because it was partially true. So he was in Trump's inner circle. You can look at what was going on. The ability, I don't think you can say it was non-zero, but the possibility of canceling all of this and canceling Artemis II and canceling everything a year ago, I don't think was non-zero. But the reason it didn't happen, well, that's not fair, but I don't think it was perception as much as the falling out didn't help keep that on the table. If for those people, and I know there are lots of people who hate this and want it to be gone, but the possibility of that happening last year was damaged a lot by the falling out between Trump and Musk. Now, I know they've repaired their relationship to some extent, but I don't think it's the same. I'm not sure it's ever going to be back to where it was at election time. And so, yeah, I think it's much less about perception and much more about those relationships and those personal relationships. And then also that Congress is still very much against canceling this. And what's changed is Congress is now saying, okay, we're ready for somebody to replace this, but if they're going to replace it, we're not going to replace it until something's flying people to the moon and back safely. Once somebody does that, then again, I've said this a bazillion times already in the last year. Once somebody does that, it's going to be really hard. It's going to make arguing to keep this system much more difficult. But until somebody's actually in the position to replace it, so you have the flip side of it too, which is, there's no guarantee. Again, we don't know how many times this is going to fly, but then again, when's Starship going to be ready? When is Blue Moon going to be ready? And I don't think the fact they don't have the confidence to talk about their schedules, I think that's part of it. That does not inspire confidence in their schedules. The fact that they're keeping those secret, they're perfectly within their right to do that, but it does not inspire confidence in their schedules. And again, to be fair about that, though, they have more time than the end of this presidential term to get those products to market. From a business standpoint, they don't need to beat the Chinese. It's just Congress and White House that need to do that. But then again, the flip side of that is Starship and Blue Moon are still going to be in great position from a market standpoint, even if they don't fly until the next decade, even if they're not flying people until the next decade, they're still going to be competitive. If not, there aren't going to be a lot of competitors in that market. And so Artemis, again, you can make the argument, which I do. I don't know how important Artemis is to them, because they have their own money. So yeah, it's not. But then that's the thing is, again, that's another thing about this, which is, again, because the money is because everybody's being independent, everybody is being funded independently. This is being funded by Congress. Starship's being funded by Musk. Blue Moon is being funded by Bezos. Those can all, from a financial standpoint, continue to be funded, irrespective of what's happening with each of them, even though it might not necessarily make sense. So it just, yeah, it's not, they all have their, they're just the differences between this system and the other systems is that there's more promise to those systems because they have, again, I've been talking about the minimal infrastructure for the system. That is a con or a negative for this system, that and the other systems have the ability and the commitment to improve the systems, and I think in the long run, Starship and Blue Moon are eventually going to be in a better position than this system. Right now, they're not ready to fly, but that'll change at some point, and it could be very, very quickly. It's just that, again, anticipating that you can anticipate that, but we still have to see it happen. So that's the thing is like, yeah, I still think if you look at the commitments from Congress to this system and the commitments from Congress for the infrastructure for this system and how they do that versus how Musk funds Starship and how Bezos funds Blue Moon, though for the private companies, I think there are more questions about, design and philosophy. Even though you can still make the argument that what they're doing and how they're doing it is much more modern compared to the way that they built SLS, but it's not. It really just comes down to when. That's why I say the question is when and not if. But again, that also means it's a question. So, and that's the thing. And so let's say Starship is ready to replace this system in 2034. I know that's pessimistic, but if that were the case, that would still, you would still have the same conversation of why keep this system around and pay for it when we can just rent a system, even if it's in 2034. If it's in 2028 or 2029, I think you're still going to have that conversation. I just don't know that this system is going to change, or the ecosystem around it is going to change even in the next decade. And so it's always going to be in this position of sort of waiting for its replacement. That I think would be very surprising, is to see the ecosystem for this improve. Maybe that's a good way of putting it, which is I just think the ecosystem for this system is old and not kept up very well, and the ecosystems for Starship are new and Blue Moon are new and are being invested in. There's a commitment to making those, to improving those. Whereas you just don't see that with this system. And I think that's one of the disadvantages of the system. And it means that it's just going to sit kind of in this stasis until somebody replaces it. And it's just a question of, it's not that easy to do what they're trying to do. And so it might take them longer. It is taking them longer than they said. But you don't know what kind of shenanigans they're playing with those schedules. But it doesn't matter. Ultimately, because they're self-funded, they can continue doing this for however long they want. So. And again, sort of the I think maybe that's another interesting thing if this starts to slide into this, well, it is sliding into the spring. So now the political stuff, we had this little dead period from when the NASA budget was passed last month until the fiscal year 2027 budget is released to the public. It might be around the time that this mission flies, and so we're going to have there are going to be words and literal words about that here probably sometime around when this mission flies. So that whole food fight is going to start again here in the next 2 or 3 months, and it might be while Artemis II is still either getting ready to fly or flying. And so again, and like I said, because everybody's entrenched in their positions in this in their tribes, I will be more surprised than not if the White House does not propose canceling Orion and SLS before Artemis 5. Maybe they'll back off, but I'm expecting them to push to cancel this system faster than what Congress just passed last year. And so I just think they did the same thing with EUS in Trump's first term, and I think they're just going to continue to press that and continue to have that discussion, so to speak, with Congress every fiscal year until the end of the term. So I'm expecting to be talking about cancellation again, and I will be surprised. I won't be completely surprised, but I'll be surprised if we're not talking about timetables for SLS and Orion cancellation during this term. And it would certainly be interesting. I would be surprised, but also it would certainly be an interesting sign. But I also just think it's much more likely that because they dislike it, they're going to try and cancel it again. And so that's going to be interesting from an optical standpoint if they were to release that during Artemis II. The only thing that's happened in the last year is, I think literally they probably will not propose canceling Artemis II. But I do think a year ago that was on the table amongst other things. Is just, a complete reset versus the sort of wishy-washy, phased termination that they proposed. But that may have also been because they didn't think they sort of knew that they weren't going to be willing to fight that battle all the way out. But things can change, and they may just dislike it so much that they're going to just keep proposing it and force Congress to do what they did last year again and again and again. Yep, I think that's a reasonable thing to say. Unkillable, I probably wouldn't say unkillable. I just think very, very difficult, has proven very difficult already. But I do think, unless we're, and I've heard the Amtrak analogy used a few times, and maybe again seems like an extreme, but I guess I wouldn't be totally surprised by that either. The idea being, even when you have fully operational commercial replacements for this system, that Congress will still say, hey, it's our system. We like it. We're going to keep funding it. We're going to keep flying missions at whatever rate they're flying them at that time. I guess you can't say that that's an impossibility. I just think that's going to be a much harder argument to make once the replacement systems are fully operational. And they're, again, it isn't just, as I've been saying, like, they're right now, both of them are going to be challenged to just fly people from lunar orbit to the surface and back in the next 3 years, but they are on the path to being able to fly people from Earth to the moon, to the lunar surface, and all the way back safely. And once that happens, once you've flown your uncrewed and crewed demos for that with people, crew demo obviously, that's just going to be a much harder argument to make, because of the cost. And so that's the other. So yeah, somebody's talking about New Glenn, or somebody's talking about when New Glenn could fly Orion. If, for a lot of these things, if they could just focus on that one thing and put all of their resources into it, they could obviously. I think it's reasonable to conclude they would be able to do it faster. But if you look at what Blue Origin has on their plate now, if you look at whatever they're doing with Artemis III, but it does seem like we're at least hearing sort of confirmation that they have, I don't know if all in is the right way to put it, but they are, we just saw New Shepard, what happened with New Shepard. They are concentrating resources on this Artemis III proposal. They already have the Artemis V architecture, the full refueling, zero boil-off, crew cislunar transporter architecture with the Mark II lander. They're still working on that. We've already heard rumors that just adding this Artemis III part to it is going to delay that. And so if you then add integration of New Glenn with Orion, that actually might be the quote unquote simplest task of those three projects, but it's not as likely to happen quickly, just because of which of those three things, which one's the priority. I guess at this point, assuming that they have a real chance to beat Starship with whatever their Artemis III architecture is, that would probably be their highest priority. Then the Mark II HLS architecture, and then maybe integrating with Orion. But it's if that's the case, it's already the third. It's already behind two other big priorities. So it's just not something. It isn't necessarily something that you can just add people to. And if you look at what Blue Origin's done in like the last 5 years, they expanded a lot and then got maybe a little too bloated, and then they've had to cut, and then they had to trim staff and refocus. And so that does not sound like an environment where you can just now hire a whole bunch of other people and still be an efficient, and then efficiently do that. So, and so, yeah, I think, and again, that's the unfortunate thing, is because they are so secretive, and they're not the only ones, but because Blue Origin and SpaceX are so secretive, it's hard to judge how just saying you're all in is, needs citation, so to speak. It's like, it's hard not to be very skeptical of just claim. I would like to see copious evidence of that, because they're so secretive. And they don't need to prove anything to anybody. It's just, I'm not going to necessarily take what they say at face value, because it doesn't matter. How I judge that doesn't affect how fast they're going to go. But I mean, they can say anything and we can be skeptical about it. And unfortunately, that's as far as it gets, because they're not going to provide any evidence. Basically, that's why a lot of this stuff just is talk. So. So it looks like not quite 3 hours. But that's all right. If I guess I'll just say last round, last round of questions, last time around, if anybody has any questions that chat hasn't addressed or I haven't addressed, and I think what we'll do is, I guess I'll see. I think what we're looking for now is to get some sort of an idea about the at least a tentative schedule. When do they think they're going to be able to roll back? How long do they think they're going to be in the VAB? And then obviously the umbrella question over that is when do they think is the soonest that they would be ready to make to launch? Is it going to be April or not? Or is it going to be then obviously May? So I'll stay open here for another 5 minutes, but I think I can do another live stream tomorrow. I was kind of planning on doing that already. It's just, it might make sense to wait maybe until Monday to see if we get some additional news. No, this helium issue did not, as far as I know. So the issue that they had on Artemis 1 is that they accidentally a gasket, I think, in one of the pneumatic systems was either crumbled or broke up, but it became foreign object debris, and it got into and stuck in a valve in the Artemis 1 ICPS, and so that happened at the pad. Pardon me. And so they ended up having to they didn't roll back only because of that, but they would have had to roll back to address that at some point. And obviously they did, but we don't know exactly what the issue is here. But that was the reason. And in that case, the debris had lodged in a valve. I think it was a check valve, on that unit. And so that had to be cleared. But they couldn't do that. The issue happened at the pad. They had to come back to the VAB for multiple reasons. But if that had been the only reason, they would have had to come back to the VAB, just like in this case. But it remains to be seen whether how closely related these are. They're related, obviously, in that we're talking about a pneumatic system that's part of the main propulsion system for the stage, and so it's likely that they're both pneumatics, helium, but those systems are complicated enough that you can have separate, independent problems. So yeah, I'm glad that you guys. I figured it made sense to to at least. This is just one of those things. I definitely was hoping that I wasn't going to have to do it for this, but in case there was some sort of breaking news, I would just come up and let you know what I'm thinking about and what I can see and the types of questions that I'm going to be asking over the next couple of days and weeks. And there'll be more opportunities, because there's still a lot of things, as I was just talking about, that we have to wait to get some thoughts from NASA and Exploration Ground Systems about timing of this, because we saw the crane move. I think the first thing we're going to see, it looks like, is they're going to remove that contingency pad access platform. Again, what it looks like they only installed one of the two, but that was, again, that was kind of the way that they were going to do this. But they'll remove that. It looks like they're getting ready to remove that today or tonight. And then we need to see when the other rollback preparations are going to be. And so kind of working inside out, when are they going to roll back? How long is it going to take to, how much work are they going to do in the VAB besides repairing this helium system problem, whatever it is? and that leads into the question of how long do they think they're going to need to stay in the VAB, which leads into when are they going to roll back, and then you have the question of are they going to do some kind of tanking test again in the spectrum of partial hydrogen loading like they did last week to all up wet dress rehearsal again. Are they going to, the question I wanted to ask yesterday, are they considering remating the tail service mast, liquid hydrogen tail service mast umbilical plates at the pad to avoid that? Go ahead and just preemptively demate and remate them, do all the interface checks and then do this tanking test or do a tanking test, content to be determined. And then obviously the big one being all of this stuff, where does that set you up on the calendar for being ready to launch, and where are you relative to either the launch period 19 in early April or launch period 20 in very late April, early May. And so those are going to be the kinds of things that we're going to be looking for to kind of at least get, again, I would prefer for them to give us a preliminary look and then come back and just give us updates and say, okay, these, here's our first look at it. Here's our next look at it, and so it would make sense to say, like when they roll back, here's what we're looking at. When they're ready, when they're ready to roll back out to the pad, here's what it looks like now. So, but we will see. But I think, let me just take a quick look and see if there have been any other blog updates. I kind of doubt it. Yeah. Let's see if Mr. Eichmann is posted. I'm sure he's posting something, although maybe not. Again, it looks like that he posted this a long post after the initial one to just again, and it is appreciated the getting the word out and at least letting people know what they know as they, again, and within reason. But that would obviously be appreciated as much as possible, giving us, again, within reason, letting us know what they know when they know it. And it would make sense at some of these obvious bigger milestones, such as when they're ready to roll back, they should at that point have a decent idea about what they're going to do in the VAB, and then maybe do something before they roll back out to the pad. But certainly when they roll out to the pad, certainly by that time they would have at least a decent idea about when the earliest they could be ready to launch would be. So. I mean, that's a fair question. What happens if they find something else? I mean, I guess it depends on it depends on what you think. I mean, I think they believed that they have decent service and maintenance. What do you call them? Operational maintenance requirements for all of these systems. And so this just unless we hear otherwise, and maybe that's part of your question that you're asking, what happens if they find other issues? But if we assume that this was just a random failure, I don't know that it implicates or suggests that there's going to be a rash of random failures at the same time. It's random in terms of its timing as well, or maybe that is the randomness. But obviously, if they have something else, I guess it's also fair to say they have the full servicing and maintenance capability in the vehicle assembly building. If something needs to be changed out, it's probably better for that to happen in the VAB than when they get back out to the pad. So it's probably fair to say that if they did find other issues in the VAB, they're in a better position to handle those quickly. Again, it depends on what's broken or what happened. But that is going to be one of the questions is what else do they do in the VAB? And we were talking about things like resetting the flight termination system. They don't have to do that at the pad, especially if they're going back to the VAB. changing out flight batteries because by the time they get back, they'll be 60 days into their 90-day wet life, if not closer to the farther into the 90 days. So I think it's very likely that they're going to be replacing some batteries before they go back out again. So we know they're going to do some things in the VAB. But in addition to fixing this ICPS thing, but we also need to find out what else that is, because that will drive how long they stay in the VAB to when they come back. So I think all of those things are either to be determined or to be announced or both. And so I guess I'll just kind of play it by ear. So I took down the live stream that I had planned for tomorrow, obviously based on this, because the live stream that I had planned for tomorrow was talking about how coming out of the very successful wet dress rehearsal, there's only 2 weeks left to launch. Well, that's not the case anymore. So we just have to see when we get the next a significant update, I guess, as to when to do that. If it makes sense to do it tomorrow, midday tomorrow, I can do that. It might make sense to do that on Monday. We'll just have to see. And I still have some work to do one way or the other, but I'm going to go ahead. And sign off for today. Well, at least for now. I don't think we're going to get anything quite of this magnitude the rest of today. We'll see. I hope not. I need a little bit of a break, but thanks to everybody for stopping by. Thanks to members as always. And if you have any other questions, I did put a post in the, I made a post ahead of this, and so there are places for additional questions, or in the comments for this. And I'll try and remember to bring those up at the next live stream. And so, but keep an eye on this space, and I'll try and provide an update certainly by tomorrow morning about when I'm thinking the next live stream is going to be. But obviously there's going to be a lot of rescheduling and replanning at this point about what the schedules are going to be now. But anyway, thanks again for everybody for stopping by. And I will see you at the next video or next live stream. But thanks again for stopping by.